Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was June 8th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. So we actually have 3 documents that we're going to be looking at today. They're all dated June 8th, and they are in Violant's Varia Register, folio 100V to 101R. These 3 documents are all about the same topic. Something happened in Mallorca. There was some kind of case that the assessor just was delaying in rendering a sentence. And so okay. What am I going to say about this? All right. The case itself is definitely between some merchants of Barcelona and and counselors, and there's a syndic mentioned. So we're going to have to get into more detail about this. But basically, the assessor was delaying in rendering a sentence in this case, and so was removed. And Violant is informing a bunch of people in Mallorca about this turn of events. The funny thing about it, though, is that it was not Violant who made the decision or initiated the removal of this assessor. It was Joan. And so we have another instance here of a different type of manifestation of the co-rule. And we'll dig into it a little bit more as we talk about how these 3 documents were created, how it maybe went through the chancery process, and then the content of the documents themselves. So let's start out, as we usually do, with the apparatus of these 3 documents. And I'm going to start out with the probata this time. And the reason for that is the 3 documents, they're to 3 different recipients. They're all about the same topic. But the probata for the second and third document is listed as idem, meaning likewise from the previous. And so the probata for the first document applies to the second and third document. The probata for the first document reads, Pedro de Besanta mandavit domine regina facta ad per generale procurator. All right, what does that mean? So it means that the scribe Per de Besant, he was commanded. Now we don't have a mihi, so I don't know how much of a direct involvement Violant had with this particular document. So we'll have to just leave that a little bit ambiguous, a little bit open. And then facta ad per would mean something like made ad per, made from Why would you have odd pair? Why would you need odd? I just kind of noticed that. So it seems like it's a little redundant. So I stopped the recording there for a moment because I needed to think about that. And as I was looking at the probata a bit more closely, I noticed that it seems like there might be a strike through here. The scribe Père de Besant might have started to write something that starts with AD or something else and did a horizontal strike through. That is possible. It's also possible we have something like the letter S. That little piece of writing, it's like 2 characters. I don't know what's going on there. I think I'm going to proceed as if that was a strike through, or even if it is an intentional AD, it's still, the meaning is going to be the same. That this was made by the Procurator General. So the Procurator is somebody who's in charge of like purchasing, spending, financial matters. And I think that the Procurator is running into trouble because this particular case that's described in the document has stalled in some sort of administrative hearing of some kind. We'll get to that in just a second. Let's talk about who the first document is addressed to. We have a really clear addressee line at the bottom of the document on the bottom left. Dirigitur Francisco N. Garriga Henner. Oh, goodness. Oh, okay. This is helpful because in a previous episode, I got confused about whether this was a place name like Girona, but now this first word in the probata, it's some kind of additional honorific for the governor because there's nothing about Girona in here. There'd be no reason to have a place name that begins with GER, and so I can go back to that earlier document and become more certain, I would say entirely certain, that when we're seeing this word here, which I'm still not quite sure what it is, it's something like gerentumtes. We are talking about another name for the governor, a certain title of some additional title for the people who are governing, because we are plural here. And then we've got gubernatores, continuing along in this second line of the addressee. And it ends that line with in insula, of the island. And then the third line, Mallorca, or we could say something like Majoricum or Majoricam. Vel eius locumtem, I think. So, or nearby, the locations of it nearby, the same locations. I should be able to work that out. I feel like I'm just at the edge of my Latin competency there. So that's the addressee for the first document. Now, let's get into the document itself. It starts out with La Reina at the top, and then the first line after that is Gobernador. So we have the governor being addressed individually, the governor of Mallorca. And then we get right into what happened. All right. Per clamosa in suario a nos feta per en marsh castemeri escriva del signore havem antes. All right. Per clamosa insinuatio. All right, so basically there's been a big complaint, and that has been made by somebody named Per Marsh. And then I really struggled with what came after that, whether there was going to be yet another name. And I think this is another name for this person, because right after customary, or maybe it's an adjective for escriva. So the person is a scribe for the king. And it might be some kind of scribe, like a scribe of the castle? Not sure. But it's either part of the name or part of it's maybe modifying the job title of the scribe for this person whose name is Per Marsh. And he has raised a complaint that has resulted in Violant understanding that there is somebody that has done something wrong. And that person is who's mentioned next in line 2. Okay, that. En hac me de villa desters assessor del vostre offici loc temps. Okay, so that Hakme de Villa, who is, and then this desters, I couldn't quite figure out, but it's some type of assessor of maybe law, something customs. I'm not quite sure. Desters, and destes, actually destes. All right, I'm not quite sure what that is. Oh, and by the way, this was the register that was the first one that went through the OpenClaw pipeline, and so in that agentic AI initial run, Gemini was not used. It conked out. It glitched. Well, there's more explanation of that, which you can read about in the FAQs. But I don't have a good transcription and translation for this document. What came through from Claude alone was not anything all that useful for this document. There are a couple things that maybe helped a tiny bit, but I decided to do this one on my own with very, very little AI influence. So I was looking up words, taking my time, and I hit a wall with this destes. Couldn't get a definition. Maybe I'm not quite getting the transcription correct there, but it's some kind of assessor who's in charge of disputes between merchants and the Jurats de Mallorca, which we see a little bit later on in the document. But anyway, this Hakme de Villa, he has for a long time, we're getting to line 3, he has for a long time delayed to give a sentence in the questio, in the case. And then we've got something like key S, who is or which. I don't know why that is a weird little abbreviation mark over that G, which we could read as a Q. So yeah, maybe it's because there's an S that follows an ES that follows it. But anyway, antes is the next word, between, and then we've got a whole list of participants in this case. There's a syndic, there's procurator it's the syndic and procurator of the counselors and some merchants of Barcelona. So Barcelona has some kind of dispute with Mallorca. The leading people of Barcelona have brought some kind of dispute against the leaders of Mallorca. I think when we see Jurats, we're talking about something like a town council. And so now Violant is saying that the person who was the royal official that was supposed to make a decision in that case in one way or the other, he has delayed making a ruling. And so what's going to happen? What did happen? That's in the next line. In line 5, we see that per la qual, for that reason, Raho, lo signore, the king, remogut lodit hacme, removed the said hacme. So, and then he's hac hominat lodit fet to the said matter to Miser Johan Marti, a Mr. Johan Marti, and then that person, Johan Marti, is going to make the ruling and break through whatever impasse. We don't get any details about the details of the case. Sorry, that was redundant. But we're definitely seeing something that's of high value. And we have, at the end of this document, this weird, I can't quite figure out what's going on, mention. It's the third line from the bottom of the text block of the document. Gran vergogna es que la persona extranjera sea vestida per injusticia. So there is, in some way, a great shame that has to do with a foreigner that has been troublesome and like somehow causing the injustice. And I can't, que la persona, unless this is metaphorical, persona extranjera, maybe they've made Hacme Villa into the shameful person who is now being treated as a foreigner. I don't know, but basically what Violant is saying here is that now there's gonna finally be some justice, and so the remedy will be carried out by the new person, who is Johan Marti. So why would somebody delay? Why would Hacme de Villa have delayed? Well, maybe this is a really thorny problem, and in either case ruling for the people, the merchants of Barcelona, or the Jurats de Mallorca, either way, it was going to generate a really negative outcome for Hacme de Villa himself. There's also like the corruption possibility where Hacme de Villa was maybe trying to get some kind of payout or bribe from one side or the other, maybe like playing them off, like going back and forth, saying, oh, you know what? The merchants of Barcelona are going to give me this much if I rule in their favor. How much are you going to give me? And then maybe almost like a kind of auction is taking place. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't impute Hacme de Villa. Maybe he was a very honorable fellow who found himself with a case that was very difficult to figure out. There's a lot of scenarios where that could happen, where basically you just get put in the middle of, no right answer on either side. All right. So we have no details about the case, so we can only speculate about all the different possibilities. But let's just take a step back and notice how it's Violant who is informing the governor and the other royal officials of Mallorca that Joan has removed this assessor, and also how it was a scribe of Joan's court who brought the attention to of this, who brought to Violant's attention this matter in the first place. So look at all of the overlap here, and even if, and look at how it's all interwoven. So people are talking to each other across. So the people who work for Joan, they're talking to the people who work for Violant. So even if there's no actual involvement of Violant herself in this issue, I think that it is reflective of a certain amount of cooperation between Violant and Joan, that they allow their staff members to interact with each other in this way, so that we have as an outcome a kind of cooperative product here in the decision of how to move forward with this situation in Mallorca. So I think we have here a nice piece of evidence for co-rule, and I would really like to know how common this was, not just across different corporate monarchies around this time, but also if we look at what was going on with Pere the Ceremonious and Joan's mother, Leonor of Sicily, and also Sibylla de Fortia after her. How much of a tradition was it for the people who worked in these different offices, like that of the Procurator General, right, who's in the probata here, to be hearing from the scribe of the king about this issue, and then for the king to make a decision, and then it's expressed from the queen. Look at that level of interweaving, and I wonder how common that was. The next document on the same folio is actually addressed to the person who's taking over from the one who has gotten fired, and that is Johan Martin. And we've got a clear addressee line: Dirigetur Johanni Martini, legum, legum, that's a bean, something like law doctori, so a doctor of law. And then the next line is in Mallorca. So a lawyer in Mallorca, Johan Martin, is now appointed to be the assessor and will rule on this case. And that is the content of the second document informing Johan Martin of his appointment. And then the third document is another mention of this case, and that is being sent to possibly one of the litigants here. The addressee line reads: Derigitur Petro Tries Juris Perito Civitatis Maioricum. So I think that this Petro, and I think Tries is the last name of the surname of Petro, he's identified as a Juris Perito of the city of Mallorca, and I think that could mean that he is one of the jurats that is in this dispute with the counselors and some merchants of Barcelona, as they're termed at the top of Folio 101R. And so all of the parties are being notified that there's a new assessor for this case. And my only guess about this is that there's some kind of dispute. Assessor, I mean, what are they assessing? I would really like to know more about the types of activities that the assessor would be monitoring. I mean, fairness in a trade deal? maybe some kind of shipment has for some reason been delayed in Mallorca, and the Barcelona merchants and some of the counselors are like, release our ships. Maybe there's a suspicion of smuggling or piracy, something like that. Maybe there's maybe it's something about like a taxation policy in Mallorca. That could be that the shipment, and there's no mention of a shipment here. I'm just totally just guessing, but maybe there's a shipment that is destined to arrive in Barcelona and it's stuck in Mallorca for some reason. So that's the best I can do in terms of guessing what the actual case is about. So the details of the case, I think, are not all that important for the point that I'm trying to make, which is that this incident demonstrates a real level of cooperation between Joan and Violant. Maybe not even consciously about this. Maybe Joan and Violant weren't even aware of this case and this dispute and the problem with Jacme de Vila. Maybe they never even heard about this. But the fact, even if that was the case, the fact that the people who work for them, who are in the office of the procurator, who are working as a scribe for them, those people feel comfortable interacting with each other. And we have here from the chancellor, the person who signed the first document. Well, actually, all of them are signed De Ponte, I think. Yes, they're all signed with De Ponte, who is the chancellor of Violant, is comfortable writing that the king has made a decision and now Violant is the one to inform others of that action. So, I mean, how do you interpret that as anything other than this working in tandem situation that I think is being represented here? Could Violant have removed the assessor? That's an interesting question. Was it within her authority to remove the assessor? It's possible that Joan decided to remove the assessor, even though Violant could have. And that would be an interesting question. So we would have to get more details about the portfolio of how Mallorca is positioned in the portfolio of Violant versus in the portfolio of Joan. So I have a feeling I'm going to come back to this document, that it's going to be an important one for what I'm trying to argue about their level of co-rule and how the co-rule took place, how it was manifested. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Multcara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, then I have done my job. Because remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Johan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.